Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and today's the 11th of March 2011. On this eventful day, we have former Green Beret and researcher Mr. John Moore. John's website is thelibertyman.com. Hi, John. Welcome.
Jules, good to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for taking our invitation up. The WebBot Forum administrator is Fox, and today he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include members Chuck, Dead Poet, Diane B, Jem D, Lua, Big Medicine, and Romans 828. For listeners, this interview will assume you have a fairly good understanding of Mr. Moore's work, including his video series Global Warming, What the Government Isn't Telling You, as well as his vast array of presentations and interviews on YouTube and his radio shows. This video will be available on YouTube for free on the WebBot Forum channel. The website is webbotforum.com. John, are you all ready to go, sir?
I am ready to go.
Fantastic. Okay, the first question we had for you, John, is as a timing for Phase 2, you stated that abrupt climate change, bizarre weather, earthquakes, tidal waves will become so numerous they become daily news. With Christchurch, New Zealand, and now the Japanese 8.9 earthquake and tsunami, in your opinion, are we in Phase 2 now?
Well, you need to remember, everybody, that I wrote that in the fall of 2005, and I published it in January 2006. I was prognosticating, to the best of my ability, what would be happening in the future, which is both dangerous and difficult. I made up those phases to give people that would be reading it in the future. Of course, the future is now something to kind of be aware of and be looking for in general terms. Beginning about January of last year, 2010, we started seeing these events become daily news. That's accelerating now, apparently. Weather events, seismic events, volcanism, all are taking and becoming daily major news stories. I'm old enough to recall, and anybody probably 40 years or older is old enough to remember when volcanoes and earthquakes were rare events in the news, something you might see maybe a couple of times a year. We're way past that now, aren't we, gentlemen? Unfortunately. So yes, I would say we're in what I've termed Phase 2. It's just not a scientific term. It's just a term to help people kind of get a feel for where we are. And yes, we are in Phase 2.
John, obviously with the events that has happened in the last 24 hours, and I believe you were talking about it in your radio show, have you got feet on the street or intel on how bad it is in Japan, and also this very serious section on the reactors there melting down? Have you got any further information on that?
I had a caller on my show this morning. He is the man, when he's on duty at the nuclear power plant he works on the East Coast, he's the man in charge of the entire plant during his shift. It's a lot of responsibility. He went into some detail about the safeguards built into these plants and how the men operating these things in Japan have the same authority he does to shut these things down independently if they feel there's some risk of a failure or disaster of some sort, which gave me a little bit of peace of mind. I was wondering, how much authority these people had. Apparently, one of the 3 reactors in Japan is already releasing radioactive material in the atmosphere. That reached the West Coast as 2 days. Don't know yet how much. We just know it is. There's a lot of unknowns here. The 2 other reactors, they believe they have them under control. Well, that remains to be seen. I interviewed a couple of people that their parents were around the 3 Mile Island event. The people I interviewed were children at the time, but they live up there near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where this all happened 30 years ago. And apparently 3 Mile Island was a lot closer to a complete meltdown than the general public has any idea of. And it's the nature of these governments and these big companies to conceal an event like that from the public if they can do so. That's probably what's happening in Japan right now.
Thanks, John. Just another quick follow-up. Obviously, I believe I just watched a news article on Hillary Clinton sending the Air Force actually to help with some coolants for the reactor. Do you get a sense from your contacts how serious the situation could be?
Well, it is very serious, and this is a big world. Having a C-141 or a C-130, I don't know what they're using, and a C-17, these things take almost better part of 24 hours to get across the Pacific Ocean, depending on where they're coming from, Alaska or the East Coast. For them to do that means it's very serious. They're taking it seriously. Apparently there was some miscommunication at first about whether we were even sending this stuff, but it looks like we are right now, right? Is that correct, Jules?
Oh, that's, I believe,
I believe we are. So. It's a serious matter, and it'll affect the entire Northern Hemisphere. And, of course, the Southern Hemisphere will have indirect effects because of what's going on. So affecting the Northern Hemisphere. These weather patterns tend to stay north of the equator or south of the equator, depending on where the event takes place. So we're certainly at risk here in North America from getting radiation from Japan.
Thank you for that. Just another quick follow-up. From your inside sources, when do you expect Phase 3 to begin? Previously, you mentioned that the military's aim in relocating to Colorado was to have the relocation completed by December 2010. Does your inside sources confirm they have now completed their relocation?
The major parts are done. They continue to work, as you might expect. In fact, in the fall of 2009, they announced the beginning of a major project to relocate the computer data center from Fort Meade, Maryland. This is a national security agency, NSA, from Fort Meade, Maryland to 20 miles south of Salt Lake City. That project is ongoing right now as we speak. So yes, they've completed the major things, and they continue to do major things, even past the deadline they gave themselves, which was December 31st, 2009. And I imagine they'll be making preparations and doing things up to the last moment. As to your question about when Phase 3 will begin, I'm not giving out any dates. I'm getting things thrown at me from my various sources, sources that are reliable on one hand, on the other, they're not that reliable. Professor McCanny has an excellent quote in one of his books. I think it may be his book on surviving Planet X. A lady was asking him to give her a date. And he says, ma'am, I'm kind of paraphrasing here. What will you do once I give you a date? Buy another case of tuna fish? People want dates. They're looking for them. They're seeking them. There's a time frame, Jules. And we're in the time frame. The federal government, the United States, and other major governments spent better part of 20 years or more getting ready for these events. Common folks like you and I and the rest and the people listening, we obviously don't have 20 years. We obviously don't have untold tens of millions of dollars. People would be well advised to pay heed, do the research. I'm a researcher. I'm a homicide detective. I'm no scientist. Do your own independent research. These things are far too important to take my word for it. Do your research, verify this is real, and then begin your preparations as soon as possible. And don't worry about a specific date. When the Navy veterans were at these classified briefings, they were just told, gentlemen, when you retire, move to the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks. They were told, gentlemen, these events will happen in your lifetime, not your children's, not your grandchildren's. These events will happen in your lifetime. And they weren't giving any specific date, not even a very specific timeline, other than that would happen during their lifetimes.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess many people on the forum here, definitely people that are preparing right now. Chuck, you have a question for John?
Yes. Good to meet you, John. Glad we're getting to chat with you. I've been a follower of yours for a number of years. You mentioned on your global warming movie, I know it was a little early in our timeline now, that the coastlines would start flooding. Based on the recent data that we're now seeing, Indonesia is still underwater currently due to, I assume, land subsidence.
Right.
we're starting to see exceptionally high tides along the east coast of the United States, especially this last fall. We were seeing 3-foot high, exceptionally high tides. When are we going to start seeing true high tides along the coastline of the United States, along the Gulf, Pacific, stuff like that?
You know, these oceans coming out of their basins will not be, a normal high tide. It's not going to be due to melting ice in Greenland or melting ice in the Antarctic. This will be due to a pole shift, something that will disrupt the rotation of the Earth. There's a bulge of water. Now, I know many of you already know this, but we need to do some any good journalist should make no assumption that your audience knows what you're talking about. Sea levels measured at Cornwall, England. It's been measured there for more than 2 centuries. They basically took a big rock at the edge of the ocean, put a horizontal line on it, and said that this is sea level. Once you get near the equator, and actually within 1,000 miles north and south of the equator, there's a bulge of water not quite 500 feet above that mark in Cornwall, England. That bulge of water is held in place by gravity and the rotation of the Earth. Anything that disrupts the rotation of the Earth will disrupt that bulge of water. That's where the water is going to come from, ladies and gentlemen. It will be a violent, very quick event. Won't be talking about a 3-foot tidal wave or a 33-foot tidal wave like we had in Japan today. We'll be talking about waves 100, 200, maybe even 300 feet high, coming inland on the East Coast at least 100 miles.
Thanks, John, for that. Lou, have you got a question for John?
Yes, I do. Hello, John. I appreciate you giving us the interview tonight.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about the future map scenario. I've read on some of the websites that I visited that the source for the Navy map was Edgar Cayce. It appears that Edgar Cayce did not actually visually portray a map, but rather verbally described areas of the country that would be underwater in the future. Do you know the source for the Navy map, and did Edgar Cayce's talks have any connection to this map?
Okay, I'll tell you what I know, Lou, and then we'll just have to...
Okay.
What I know is I've debriefed about 24 Navy veterans. Most of them were veterans of the submarine corps. There was one intelligence officer from another service who did a 3-year tour of duty with the submarine corps. Only one Army guy. I've only debriefed one Army guy. He was a command sergeant major who'd seen the map. But the rest of them were Navy guys. They saw the classified map in these briefings. And the men I debriefed, Lou, they were not the scientists. They were the guys sitting in the folding chairs in the audience. They weren't told who or how the map was created. They were just told this will be the new coastlines of North America. So that's as much as I know, is that the U.S. Navy has been holding out this map. Now, here's an interesting part of it, a kind of a subplot. One of my listeners to my Sunday show, he got a copy of my DVD. He watched it, he called me up, and he says, "John, I saw your map." I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, I was a young sailor. It was 1979. I was setting up a briefing room in New Orleans for a bunch of admirals for a weekend briefing." And he says, "John, admirals don't do weekend briefings." So he sets up the chairs, the sound system, the lights, and so forth. And he saw the map on the wall, but since he was not in the briefing, he never knew what it meant until he watched my DVD 30 years later. He says, "John, these admirals showed up. They're smoking cigars, slapping each other on the back. How's the wife? How's the family? Joking and cutting up." He said when they left that briefing, they all looked like their puppy dog died. And for 30 years, he did not know what went on in that briefing room until he saw my map. Now, there's about 20 or so maps, Lou, done by psychics that you can see on the internet. There's Edgar Cayce's, there's Gordon Michael Scallion's, there's probably 17 or 18 others.